Tell me that word that you mentioned that typified your backyard type game.
Fun.
Yep, yeah. Fun. Big one. Put your hand up if you had fun. Yeah. Why would we play it? Why would we make up a game that wasn't fun? It's going to be fun. What else? Yes, usually there's a game involved, isn't there? Okay, there's some sort of score or there's something you're trying to win.
You're trying to beat your brother or sister at some, you're trying to beat each other.
Absolutely.
And then also there's a little bit of rough and tumble, usually too, a bit of contact.
Yeah, yeah.
Depending on your brothers and sisters.
True, yeah. Yes, spot on. You design the rules to suit what? To suit
Area of play.
To suit the area you've got. So you're playing a game of backyard cricket. Mum's favourite rose bush is sitting right there, and Mum said to you, oh, if you knock any petals off that, you don't. You're cleaning your room or your brother's room for the next week. So if I'm a left-hander, it's like, well, I'm not playing any shots off my legs anymore because it keeps hitting that. So now I'm going to start playing out here. Shape starts to shape what I do, but you need to adapt. All of a sudden, you've got to be creative. What else?
Max involvement, so staying on the cricket like 6 and out, so no one's batting too long.
Absolutely.
If you big thick edge and goes behind you, whacks the shed, you're out as if there was a slip there. So just get the players rotating and
so it
comes back to fun.
Exactly. You're adapting the rules so that everyone can participate. And is it fun if someone stays in and bats the whole time?
Yeah.
Of course it's not. So all of a sudden the fun's gone. So we make our own rules to bring the fun back into it. What about if you've got an older brother or sister and then some little kids down the street come in? Do you just say, no, clear off, we don't want you to play? It's more a case of, yeah, all right, come on, yeah, we want more numbers. We don't want to just have one-on-one all the time. It's a bit dull. So what do you do then?
Different rules for little kids.
Yeah, and what sort of rules did you have? How did you adapt them? Do you remember?
Probably give more chances to get out.
Good.
Slow the bowling down if you're playing cricket.
And if they're not that good at all, you stand this distance away and it's just these little underarm lollies. You don't want them to go out all the time. If they go out all the time, what are they going to do? Is this I'm not playing? Now we're down a number. Now the game's boring again. It's no longer fun. So these are the sorts of things that typify our backyard games. These, believe it or not, these types of characteristics are things that permeate throughout all of the different skill acquisition principles. So if you're ever not sure, go back and think, what do we like to do as in our backyard games? And I'm a firm believer that it doesn't matter. We associate this with kids. If you've ever done a primary school level activity with a group of senior elite level athletes, initially they might say, that's for kids. But see, if they get involved in it, you hear enjoyment and you get massive engagement. They absolutely love it. Because it's fun. All of a sudden training's fun. So I think this should be the mantra. Try to, when you think of your practice sessions, think of these sorts of characteristics. Okay? We want it to be fun. We want people to come back and be engaged in this process. If they're bored, you're minimising learning or hampering learning.
Is there any room, I know during that growing up, we weren't allowed to play with the big boys, but the big boys until we got to a level. And that's what we did as young fellas, is that we did whatever we could to get on the big court.
Yeah.
So is there some kind of correlation with that? Because it made us tough. Kids from our area were known as tough because you didn't get it. It wasn't fun.
Yeah.
Well, it was fun to make it. That's what our fun was.
Yeah.
Is that we ended up being on the big court with the big boys.
Aspiring towards something and developing yourself. Yeah, sure.
It always starts as fun, yeah, and then it becomes the level of competitiveness.
But you'll find that they just pick up courts in the city. You'll have this one court that these gun players are on there, and I'm walking up there thinking, I'm not even near that standard. And there's the court over here, guys want to play. Away we go. So we kind of self-manage a bit at that level. And as I feel more confident, so I want to have a crack at this court over here. Now I've grown a bit, I'm a bit stronger, my skills are better. So we kind of self-manage it to an extent. Yeah, this is what I'd call sort of the traditional approach. This is how I used to coach, and a lot of coaches still coach like this. It's very coach-centered. So as you can see, the key notion here is lots of instructions. The idea is that people don't learn unless I tell them what to do. I have to inform them every step of the way. We break down drills, so we just learn certain parts and then assume that we learn this part and then it fits back into the entire game itself again. And a one-size-fits-all in that there's only one way to shoot a basketball, everyone has to do it like this. So that's very much a coach-centered approach. And the approach we're advocating is more the coach as a facilitator. It's not about me, it's more about I create opportunities for others to learn. I'm not necessarily teaching you, I'm creating the environment where you teach yourself. Practice is not about removing and avoiding all mistakes. Think about kids, when we start to learn to walk, do we see a little kid, they're crawling, they stand up, try to walk, fall over once, they're never going to walk again. We used to accept they have to make mistakes. Okay, so mistakes, if you change your thinking, mistakes are a solution that wasn't successful on that occasion. But we figure out what works by figuring out what doesn't work. And one solution that doesn't work in this situation might work over here. Things are game-like, and we try to individualise it. So again, we're trying to guide players towards things. Can I have two people? I'm just going to demonstrate a couple of points to you. It's going to seem weird. It's going to be AFL handball. Two people who haven't played much, if any, AFL, and don't really know how to handle much. Yep, one. Someone else. Yep, come down. Please.
Well, most girls haven't played it.
Yeah, not anymore, right? They're coming in.
Just stand. Get about that distance away. Now, all I want you to do is watch and listen. Okay, nothing more. Just look at it through coach's eyes, not, oh, that looks pretty interesting. Look at it as a coach, not as a spectator. Oh yeah, Michael and Deborah? Sorry? Oh, Martin, sorry. Martin and Deborah. Okay, so I want you to handball the ball backwards and forwards to each other. Just stop there. They knew how to handball. They said they didn't, but they already knew. I didn't have to teach them any of that. Now, I want you to make the ball spin backwards through the air.
With a handball?
You have to handball it still, but it has to spin backwards through the air. Smooth tables forward? Yeah, backwards. That's it.
Oh, there you got me thinking.
No, that's it. That's it. Good. Good. Nice. Good. Now, I want you to make it spin forwards through the air. Nice. First attempt. Now, I want you to handball it behind your back. As long as it's a handball, it just has to be behind your back.
On the back. Behind the back.
Yeah. There it is. Good. Good. First attempt.
Oh, wow.
Good.
Sorry.
That's good. That's fine. Good. Second trial already. It's on target.
No, I'm not very good.
That's all right. That's fine. Now, this is the toughest one.
Oh.
Just take a step back for me, Deborah. That's it. I want you to handball the ball so that it runs along the ground and then kicks up to your partner at the last minute. Really? Oh, very close. Just take take a step back. You can't. That's it. That's all right. That's all right. There it is.
Oh, good.
Did you see it? If Deborah was a foot further back. See, it was just popped up, just that little bit. All right, give him a round of applause. How did I coach them? Oh, there's a lot of trial there. Was I happy with that? Yeah. Absolutely, I didn't correct anything. How else did I coach?
Lots of feedback.
What feedback did I give them?
Positive. Good job. Well done. Keep going.
Yep, so it's more just encouraging the effort, yep. What else?
Eye contact.
Instructions.
Sorry?
You repeated your instructions.
Yep, so make sure the instructions were clear.
Variety.
Right, yeah.
House classes.
Yep.
But most of all, you were patient. You gave them time to learn the process, either themselves or off each other.
Yep. So I never once stepped in and said, no, that's wrong, don't do that. It was all, not everything worked, but very quickly, what was that, 3-4 minutes? For two people that really have never played AFL, the handball's got pretty good, so fast. Now, have they learned it? Probably not, but you can see how people change very quickly.
Cognitive learning phase, yeah.
Cognitive learning phase?
Unconscious incompetence, conscious incompetence, conscious competence, and then unconscious competence. That's you have, everything you learn goes through that phase. So that was at the start, they didn't have a clue, then they're starting to know that they suck at it, then you get better at it, and then eventually it becomes muscle memory.
Yep. You'd have to educate me on some of this. What about instructions? What were my instructions?
Quite minimal.
How was it? Yep, and how are they focused?
Encouraging.
Yes.
Eventually have a go.
Yes, it was. Yeah, goal-based or outcome-based. I never once said, do it this way. I never told them how. Not once was it how. It was just what outcome I wanted them to achieve. So in basketball, you're teaching someone to learn how to shoot the ball. The important outcomes in basketball are that typically, for shooting the ball, it's got to spin backwards, tends to hold its line a bit better, and we want some arc on it. Okay, the hoop is like that, so the higher the arc, the more downward it can go, the more likely it is to go in. Too flat. Now, breaching the converted, I can tell players all that. I could just say make the ball spin backwards, and when it goes in the hoop, I want it to just swish. So nothing tells them how to do it, it's just outcome based. They figure out the process for themselves. They know their own bodies better than anyone else. They've been living in it for long enough. They figure it out for themselves. So if you get the outcome right, they get the process on the way as they go. But they find their own technique that works to achieve that outcome. The ball goes in the hoop from inside the three-point line. It's worth 2 points. Doesn't matter how it gets there. If it goes in, it's worth the same amount of points. Okay, so technique's important, but just for one. Yeah.
What if I've got a really ugly shot, but it's just uncoordinated? It goes in, but it's just like Lamella's shot.
So if it, well, Lamella's playing at the highest level of basketball, and there's plenty of players who do. I've seen Japanese players shoot three-point shots like that. They are lightning quick, and they never, well, I shouldn't say never, that's absolute, but they rarely miss. So because it doesn't look pretty, it doesn't have to look pretty. You don't get an extra point because it has great technique. If it goes in, and if it's going in consistently, why fix it?
Sorry, I say that
Yeah.
my daughter's got a good shot.
Yeah.
Different schools of thought.
Yeah, there is, absolutely.
But what about, like, kids who are smaller and younger and they're shooting, 3 points, 3-pointers, the long shot, and they're not using more, they're trying to use more body strength rather than technique.
Chest pass or
And then, and then eventually,
Physically can't. But they're physically not capable of reaching that range without pushing it with 2 hands.
That's a really good point. We're actually doing a lot of research. I won't dwell on this too long. We're doing research to try to help solve that. And the easiest way, kids are using a basketball is too big for them. We've got under 12s using a women's adult-sized basketball. It's like us shooting a medicine ball from the centre court. How else are we going to do it? Everyone in this room would be like this. And what does that look like? A 12-year-old shot from 3-point line. So we need to change that.
hasn't the size 4 been introduced?
In that range.
Yeah, no, it does. You're right. It does. Yeah.
And there's so many skills.
Absolutely. Yeah. We want to be able to get success to that. So if the ball's a limiting factor and they're just struggling to make the distance or can't make the distance, then we change something. You're right. Technique is amazing.
It's that fine line between, yes, you can get it in, it looks ugly, but how much percentage are you getting? At what point do you balance the percentage that you're going to get with technique?
Yeah, good question. So there's certain, when you're shooting at basketball or any skill, there's certain non-negotiables. If you're going to kick something, it's going to look something like that. You're putting a swinging peg in that sort of motion. But there's such a broad bandwidth of what's possible and what's acceptable. You've got to be, if you decide to step in and change a technique, you've got to be pretty confident that you're doing it for the right reasons. If it's just because it doesn't look like everyone else's or like this blueprint you have in mind, it's like, well, are you changing it for your reasons or to benefit the player? If it's not going in because they're doing something really weird, well, so if they're not getting success, if the outcome's not occurring, you've got some evidence to perhaps suggest that you might need to change it. Or if it's going to cause an injury, so lots of sports say it's a good one. So volleyball spiking, if you don't have your technique right, you keep doing it long enough, you blow out shoulder. So that's a good reason to change technique. But it's, yeah, you have to make that call as a coach. I can't tell you what good technique should look like because what is good technique? It's pretty broad. And as you see, you look at every player, they all shoot the ball differently. Every single player, at every single level. But it's a really good discussion, there's no question. This is what the research is showing. Admittedly, this is from soccer, but my anecdotal observational evidence suggests that this is across the case for the majority of sports. So here, they asked coaches, these were fairly elite level coaches, what are you trying to achieve in your practice sessions? And they're saying the right things. We want to develop the complete player, good decision makers, we want to make them more creative, that sort of thing. But then when they looked at their practice sessions, about half of the session was kind of game-like and likely to lead to these sorts of things. The other half wasn't at all. So there's a big chunk of practice that was nothing like the philosophy that they had in mind. And when they looked at the amount of time they were giving instructions, 42.5% of when they opened their mouth, they were giving instructions. In other words, they were telling players what to do. Okay, that's a lot of information and not much opportunity for players to figure things out for themselves. This is still from soccer. This is some different research, but you can still see that, well, actually the point to take from this one is that 31% plus the 6% for transitions, so 37% of the practice session was taken up with inactivity. What do you think was filling that time? Coach talking? Absolutely. What's the other one?
Drink break.
Yeah, people lining up in a row waiting for their turn. If you watch practice sessions, and I implore you to watch your own, I can't watch a practice session without my skill hat on. I see this all the time. I just think, how easy would it be? I'll see coaches have all these players waiting their turn at one end of the court. They've got the whole court available to them. You've got another basket at the other end. The least you could do is split them in half and you double their trials straight away. We don't learn as well just standing watching. We need to be doing. This is a key word, and if you keep this word in mind, this adaptability. So the truly skillful people, in any domain to be honest, in terms of their motor skills, are really adaptable. They just find a way. They change their behaviour, their technique, whatever you want to call it, to consistently achieve an outcome. So think about Michael Jordan. You throw any defender at him, and he just finds a way to manipulate his body, change the ball to get as much success as he can. And if you think about that notion of adaptability, that's what we're trying to encourage our own players to develop, to become more and more and more adaptable. If to be skillful is to be adaptable, we need to try to promote that notion of adaptability in players. We want them to have the skill set that enables them to cope with any scenario. Oh, you're double teaming me into that court. I can get past that. Oh, you put a taller defender on me, faster defender. I know how to solve that. What an ideal scenario. Best players in the world are the ones that they just find a way no matter what. And this is an important word. So they become attuned. In other words, they become better at picking up information around them to guide their actions. So in a basketball scenario, this is from some research, they found that, so these are the attacker's feet and they're the defender's feet. They found that the better attackers, you'll know all this of course already, the better attackers, they'll recognise this foot positioning when the defender is quite close to them, and they'll drive and attack the lead foot. And they're just attuned to that information. As the defender is approaching them, they recognise, oh, you're close to me, I'm going to attack this foot. However, when the defender's further away from them, they just go left or right. But they're attuned to, they're picking up, and they've learned to pick up that sort of information to help guide their actions, to help anticipate what should occur next. So if this sort of stuff is important for anticipation, for being adaptability, we need to provide opportunities for players to pick up and learn that in practice sessions. This is the first principle, representativeness. So make practice representative. A lot of the sessions I see, all different skills, not just shooting, kind of look like that, not a defender in sight, and yet the game is messy. You need to be able to learn to shoot against the defender. So we need to have practice tasks that enable people to learn how to shoot against the defender, and the range of other game variables that exist. When we did some research with Andre and Marnus from the Boomers, and this is sort of what practice has looked like this is in other sports. This wasn't from the Boomers, this wasn't from basketball. This is based on some other research where open type shots in practice sessions, about 65% of the time, that's what the shot lock looked like. Okay, so most shots without a defender on them. Whereas when we looked at what happened in games, 15% of the shots were undefended, the other 85% were defended. And when we say open shots, we coded that as being the defender is maybe this distance away. So they're not 10 metres away, they're on their way, just weren't in their face. So if this is what training looks like, big chunk practicing open shots, we're not preparing people for the game that looks like this. So that's the whole notion of representativeness. Make practice as close as possible to what the game looks like.
So you've got
within reason.
skill acquisition and then transitioning to implementing it into your game, yeah?
Yeah, skill acquisition should be game-like.
But
as much as
at the
possible.
start, so you start off by yourself with the ball and the ring, and then you start to, once you've mastered that, and that's the way that I've always learned, so then we transition it.
Yeah, it's a good point. That's sort of that linear approach, and I reckon I'd encourage you to explore other ways around that. So, of course, if we've got a 5-year-old who's never picked up a basketball, tried to shoot it before, we don't want to be in their face blocking every shot. Okay, so for them it might just be, I just want to understand how this ball works, how do I get it from here up into that circle in the sky in front of me. Okay, but I've done this sort of stuff with my daughter, who was 5, 6 at the time, and I just said, all right, I'm going to stand here, and she was a bit shorter, so this, right, you've got to shoot it over me. So, she got it, okay, shoot it over my hand now. And all of a sudden, the ball went from this sort of thing to, oh, it's easier if I lift it up higher. There was a defender in front of her. So, of course, I could have blocked every shot. Great. It was blocking a 5-year-old shot. Yeah, good on me. But it was more about creating that environment. Okay? And so, we just need people to become accustomed to the presence of a defender. That's what the game is. It doesn't mean that we have to load them up and take them to the NBA level in their first instance, but ideally they're learning to shoot over someone, and as they get better, I'm starting to challenge them more and more. This is I've adapted this from a photograph taken of a whiteboard in the Lakers change room, apparently, that's where it was. And so you can see some big names here, Kobe Bryant, Steve Nash. So they looked at their percentages. So in practice, on average, they're making 89% of their free throws. That's pretty good. Any coach, I reckon, would take that, so awesome. When it got into a game though, dropped to 69%. And you could see some big drops. Look at Dwight Howard, pretty well nailing them in practice. In a game, there's something going on there.
Because you can't shoot.
Well, he could shoot. He's doing really well in training. So what's the difference here? Exactly. What do you got in the game? Fatigue, pressure, crowd. Exactly. So we need to make sure that I have no idea what causes. Absolutely no idea. But if I was to guess, I'd say this environment looked nothing like this one. It was probably home court, very familiar, no noise, no crowd, no pressure, no fatigue, whatever it was. All those factors missing. So of course you're going to look good here, but you're preparing yourself for that environment. The game environment looks nothing like that. So it's difficult to replicate that. You can't just grab 20,000 people off the street to come in, I want to shoot 5 free throws today. But within reason, okay, we need to be thinking about this.
They're probably doing 50 in a row.
Yeah. You're spot on. Free throw shots, yep. It'll be, the coach has told me to get 50 done this session, I'll be 50 in a row. So it's going to be inflated performance.
What we do is we run a session and before, do our drills for 10, 15 minutes, whatever it is. And then before we go to drink break, we do 2 free shots and I say, if you make it, the first one, we're into overtime. If you make the second one, we've won the game. So I say we're shooting in the last 5 seconds, and then all the kids have to make a lot of noise. And actually, it's gotten to the stage where the kids come and stand in their closed space, to put the pressure on. And it's really made a difference with the kids shooting in our competition, like when we go to games. Yeah.
I'm glad you're doing that sort of stuff, and it's just a shift in mindset. It's not about just getting the shots done; it's about making them representative. If you want it to transfer, it has to include the same variables that exist in the game. And you can see here, basically you've probably read this by now, basically pressure influences at NBA level, it's influencing shots. So we need to get better at coping with that. This is from Taekwondo, so a completely different sport of course, but again it highlights a nice point. If you look at, so the red bars, that's what was happening in training. And you could see anxiety slightly lower in training, they were more confident, less mental effort, heart rate was lower, and their opponent was more predictable. Whereas in competition it's the opposite. So clearly, training was a completely different environment to the competition environment. This is the part I like the most. In training they knew their opponent of course, but they said that when they went into a bout against someone, they were unfamiliar with that person, so the first portion of their bout was all about figuring out the strengths and weaknesses of my opponent relative to my strengths and weaknesses. So that problem solving initially was really important. They described that when they were asked about it. Basketball's the same. If I've competed against you in training for the last 10 weeks, 10 years, pretty much know your strengths and weaknesses. Doesn't mean it doesn't change, but if I've never played against you before, initially, I might overguard you. Jeez, it's quick, good dribble, bang. I'll make an adjustment straight away. Oh, now he's got a good 3-point shot. I've got to cover all angles here. So we do all that problem solving. We do it in games. We need to create those opportunities in practice sessions as well. Let them solve problems. And as coaches, you're setting problems for them. So representative design, hopefully you already picked up, it's just trying to make sure that practice looks and feels. We've got to get the emotional elements as well. Get that pressure, the frustration, the elation, the enjoyment, and the look. We want activities to look like they would look like in a game, within reason. And you underline this word sample, because this whole notion doesn't argue. In fact, before I go into that, let me ask this question. So if the game is the most representative environment, shouldn't training just be a game week in, week out? That would be the most representative we could have.
I tried that, it doesn't work.
Why doesn't that work?
Because kids on the bench sitting there not doing anything.
Yep, good. So you might have players. So you might have, you might have a squad of 15, so you've got 5 players sitting on the bench. Yep.
Just when you want to perfect your systems, sometimes it's necessary to break them down. It's not happening in full court, and you know, you could, especially like say this season with the men's team I had, we had a 10-week season. It was so short, 4-week pre-season.
Yep.
So probably that was one thing I learned this year, to refine it a little bit more in the aspects that you want to work on.
Yep.
And then come back to, I mean, you want to be playing the whole time, I agree.
And so, actually, let me ask you a question first. How many 3-point shots would a player take on average in a game? Maybe 6?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it might be, or even shots. How many shots would a player take in a game on average in a team? 10 shots. So if you did 10 shots every training session, are you going to get better at your shot? A little bit, but not a lot. Okay, so that's what that word sampling means. So worked with a great coach, Ian Stacker, and he said, Adam, to me in my mind, one-on-one is shooting practice now. So we've sampled it. We've got a shooter, we've got a defender, we've got the court, and we've got a basket they're shooting at. There's our shooting practice. Okay, so we haven't got 5-on-5, but we've at least got the core features that we need in order to help facilitate transfer from practice to competition. So that's what we mean by sampling. The other notion is variability. So I spoke about trying to encourage players to become more adaptable. Variability is a way of doing that, and a very good way of doing it. This is from Rafael Nadal. So if you haven't heard of him, he's a very, very talented tennis player. This is from his book. So read through that. Hopefully it highlights to you the importance of variability. Of course, we know the game is different on a moment-to-moment basis. Everything and everyone in that game is shifting and changing to some extent. So you can see Nadal has captured a lot of that nicely. So adding variability to a practice session adds 3 things, and I'll show you this as a demonstration in a minute. So as the environment or the practice session becomes more variable, so there's things changing fairly frequently, we need to explore what works and what doesn't work. Because things are changing all the time, the solution that worked a second ago might not work now. So I have to find another solution. So I'm always problem solving and trying to figure things out. Throughout that process, we become more adaptable. As the environment keeps changing, we need to figure out different ways of maintaining a level of consistency. And ultimately, we get better learning as a result. Let me show you a little demo here. Just ask you don't have to be skilled or unskilled. I think 2 people to come out for me, please. I'm just going to ask you to throw a ball backwards and forwards to each other. You ready to grab a partner?
I can better too.
So coach is often reluctant to talk, often reluctant to do demonstrations in a group. All right, I just want you to throw the ball backwards and forwards to each other. Okay, stop there. Now you just got to avoid that. What have you noticed? Apart from me starting to pump. What have you noticed? What was the difference between the first and second?
Yeah, adaptability.
Adaptability. And the other word that I had up, they're adapting and they're exploring. So that lob pass, it worked once, and the second time, so yeah, I got that one. Got it. So it's, that didn't work the second time. Now I have to find a different solution or vary or adapt another one. Did I tell them to start faking? No. What's your name, sir? Drew. Drew? What did Drew start doing? Once I face guarded him, it's like all manner of fakes. Did they do any of that whatsoever when I wasn't there? Why would they bother? It's just a waste of energy. You look weird if you started doing all this stuff. Why are you doing that? But if we add some variability, in this case it's just a defender, all this stuff emerges. They explore, they adapt, and I'm still puffing. Geez, that's ridiculous. Give a round of applause.
Martin, we didn't get applause, did we?
Yes.
Oh,
So-
yeah.
This is a really simple, but I think really powerful model for thinking, well, not a model, it's just a framework, in a word, for thinking about how you add variability, and also, as you mentioned before, the degree of difficulty you might make a shooting task, for example, or any task for that matter. So, across the bottom, we've got task difficulty, something really easy, something really difficult. And then learning benefit up here. So it either has next to no learning benefit or high learning benefit. The task I gave the two guys to do before, they were throwing the ball backwards and forwards to each other. Where would you place that for difficulty? Very low. Did they look like they were learning anything? Didn't, did it? They'd solved it. The first time they'd thrown the ball, yep, done, solved it, we know how to do it. Learning, not much. If I said, here's 15 balls each, 3 defenders in the middle, now do it, I'm off the Richter scale here. It's too difficult for them. Notice also that learning is equally very, very low. It's just so difficult, I can't make sense of any of the information. So I can't understand it, therefore I'm really not learning a lot. So of course it's that happy medium. Now this point will be different for every single player, and for one player for shooting, there could be quite a difficult task, relatively speaking, and that's their challenge point. When it gets to dribbling, left-handed dribbling or non-preferred hand dribbling, all of a sudden they're at a really low level. Okay, so this framework helps to determine how difficult or how much variability do we add to a practice session. And things I look at, those top 3, and think about the throwing activity you saw a second ago. Limited mistakes. They didn't drop it once. Players looked bored. They really didn't look like they were having a lot of fun, did they? And low emotions. They're switched off. They're not frustrated. They're not elated. So if you see those things, there's a good chance that the challenge point is probably too low. Okay? Doesn't mean that it always has to be here. Okay? Sometimes you might back it off. But if you want to maximise learning, generally it would be around that challenge point. This third principle, the third and final one, constraints-led approach is what it's called. Now, I'm throwing out a lot of scientific terms here. So constraints-led approach, variability, adaptability, exploration, etc. My belief is that if I was working with you as a sports scientist, you would expect me to at least have some sort of an understanding of basketball. So if you said, key, 3-point shot, offhand dribbling, floater, you'd expect me to understand as much of that as possible. And I really think if we get this shared language, if you understand some of the scientific terms, it opens up a whole new world. All these books and resources and podcasts and journal articles, if you want to read them, all of a sudden you get past the words. The words are just a label, nothing more. It's understanding what it means. So you already understand what representativeness means, what variability means, challenge point, what that means. It's just a label. Okay? So I try to educate coaches as much as possible in these words. So constraints-led approach simply means that we manipulate constraints. And these are the 3 constraints, but we manipulate them to try to achieve a particular outcome that we want. So we could manipulate rules, equipment, court size, player attributes, so we could make them more anxious, we could make them fatigued, we could change things within the environment. It doesn't matter if you don't remember the labels, it's not important. But the key thing is we can manipulate even one very small feature and we can achieve a very specific aim at the other end. I'll take you through this a bit more. Some research that we did a few years ago where we looked at the same basketball shooters. They were very talented, male basketball players, and we had them shoot a basketball from all different shots, all different locations, different types of shots, uncontested and contested. What we found was that the differences between the two were these. So when there was a defender on them, they jumped higher. None of this will be earth-shattering for you. They released the ball quicker, so they caught it from the pass and got rid of it quickly. Higher arc on the shot when there was a defender present, and they tended to vary. In other words, they were adapting their shot when the defender was present. Funnily enough, all of these things are what coaches often ask players to do. We want you to catch and get rid of the thing. Don't take all day to shoot it. Put a nice high arc on your shot. Jump to elevate over the defender if you can. Be adaptable in your shot. We didn't tell them to do any of that stuff. All we did was put a defender on them, and they just did it naturally. So if you want a player to do this, there's your constraint to manipulate. Put a defender on them, and they'll instantly start changing it. That's the nature of the constraints-led approach. You think, I've got to get this player to get a higher arc in their shot. How can I do it? You could tell them all day, every day. I'm sure you've tried telling them, and they still don't do it. Put a defender on them, there it is.
It's so hard for a lot of basketball coaches. It's the dribbling one is the same. If you don't teach them how to dribble first, when you put someone on them, what they do, they just put the guard hand up and they stand there and they don't move or they dribble away. You don't teach them how to shoot first, you put a defender on them. They end up taking it one step, throw it over their shot, hook shot, and it never goes there. All those coaches like Merz and they're talking about it, like you got to play more, and I think they all agree to it, but they all do the skills first. They don't step.
Yeah. And that's where the challenge point's probably wrong. If you've got a player who just freezes up, puts their arm bar out and just dribbles on the spot when there's a defender on them, there's something going on there. The defender's clearly perturbing them too much. Likewise, if they revert to shooting it like this where there's a defender on them, it's like, well, we need to back off from the defender here. Clearly, they don't have the capability to.
And I 100% agree. I'm not trying to do it. I 100% agree. We talk about it all the time.
Yeah.
But I think it's still a stage process with development. It's got to be last one just to take it.
Yeah, ideally you're trying to develop both at the same time. So again, if you're working on their dribbling, for little kids it might just be, dribble down the back of the court, but really quickly they'll get that. Then it's a case of, all right, well now we've got 4 players with the ball, there's witches' hats in 4 corners, you've got to dribble the ball through the middle and touch each of the cones with your foot. Now we've got some interference. We don't have a defender per se. We've got 4 people in a smaller space. Then they've got to dribble and avoid each other. So we're kind of elevating, but they're getting that whole concept of what do I need to do in a game of basketball to dribble? I need to be able to control the ball and not lose possession of it. But I see, I'm making it sound easy, and I know it's not.
No, you're making that sound like what I was talking about.
Yeah.
Okay. I was talking about. But you got to do that with no matter what age. But you just have the young kids just dribble up down and learn how to dribble. Same as shooting a gun. Teaching an older kid from a junior level lift his shot up to just shoot at a high arc if you want. You got to do that as what you're doing with the little kid for the same skill set.
Goes back to your last one, reducing the difficulty for the optical learning.
Exactly. Yeah. That's right. You've got to meet them where they're at. That's right. Yeah. And you'll see it all the time when they're overwhelmed. They'll struggle. So I'll push them too much here.
So skill acquisition, the hardest thing is to make players understand they have to practice at game pace, not just go and freely shoot around. Like I'd rather see 30 minutes in the gym at game pace than an hour and a half with their mates like we used to play.
Yeah.
But the skill acquisition and the transfer comes quicker at that pace and that intensity.
And that's where, and you're spot on, I agree, and that's where, as a coach, you become really creative at thinking about what's the outcome I want to achieve. I want them to play at game pace. Tell me, what are some things that will encourage players to play a faster style of game? What are some constraints you could change? Yep.
Time.
Yeah. What would you do with time?
Countdown for them, so they've got, certain amount of time to achieve a certain purpose.
Yep. So instead of a 24-second shot clock, right, so you've got 10 seconds. Depending on how fast you want them to play and what you want them to learn. Again, I'm not saying it's easy, but that's a really good example, I think, of a good example of where you think about what's the outcome I want to achieve, and you manipulate constraints in the practice task that you're confident will encourage them to learn how to do exactly what you're after. And over time, if you think using that sort of mindset, it becomes easier and easier. I went through the same process. The coaches would say, Adam, we want them to learn to do this, and I'd walk away and think, well, how am I going to do this? And all I started to think was, well, that's the outcome the coach has asked me to try and achieve. What things are likely to help encourage players to do that in a sort of a practice game-like activity? What do I need to do? What rules do I change? What equipment? What line markings? Player numbers? That sort of thing. Do I change matchups, for example? Whatever it is to try to encourage the outcome to occur. That's right. So, with this constraints approach, I've kind of just gone through it. Think about the problem you want to address, manipulate the constraints, and ideally you do it in a setting that's representative, so as game-like as possible. Yeah? Yeah, yeah. So, actually, can I just give them a task first?
Yeah.
Choose any one of these three, and I want you to tell me what the outcome was. So, these are the things that the constraints that we manipulated. But I want you to tell me what the outcome was. So the first one, we got elite level, these were Olympic level divers or swimmers on the start blocks, and they had to go off the start, dive into the water, and I stood on the side of the pool, with a pool noodle, and I said, you've got to dive over that. Okay, so what outcome were we trying to achieve? Basketball, we matched up every player in the squad. We said, all right, tallest 5 players, there you go, you're on one team. Shortest 5 players, you're on that team, there you go, you're playing against each other. What was the outcome we were trying to achieve? And water polo, I think you said you played water polo, if I get this right. We said, yep, we're going to take you out of the pool and you're playing European handball on a basketball court now. Why would we do that? So what outcome are we trying to achieve? Choose any one of those 3 or go through all 3 of them, chat to the person beside you and think about what outcome were we aiming to achieve as a result of manipulating these constraints.